So this is our instance of ServiceNow. And the first thing we wanted to walk you through is a dashboard we've set up for our business continuity management process. So along the top here, we have two pie graphs, which are just showing us high-level information about our process, including the status of all of our business impact analysis, as well as the status of our threat assessments that are occurring. And for folks who maybe aren't as familiar with ServiceNow, each one of these reports, we can click into any one of these wedges. So for a given chart, if we want to see the two submitted statuses, we could click in there and it would show it to us so that we could dive deep on the data. Similarly, in the report below, we've broken out those BIAs by the different locations within our organization. So this helps us understand, have we adequately assessed the processes in all of our different locations? Do we fully understand the potential impact if one of these locations were to go offline? And so we could see for one of our facilities here that there is a large number that are in a new state. They haven't been filled out, and maybe we want to see who's responsible for filling those out so that we can take action to make sure that they complete those assessments. Based on those assessments, we're going to have a lot of information about our processes. We're going to understand the impacts if they were to lose technology or a vendor, but we also want to understand the impacts to revenue should we lose any of our processes. And so this next report is really drawing attention to the processes that have been deemed revenue critical, those critical revenue generating processes for our manufacturing customer. And so in their instance, their truck manufacturing process was obviously one of the key revenue generating processes, and that if they can't manufacture their main product, they can't sell it and they can't generate that revenue. But beyond just the manufacturing of those trucks, their retail chain is the other key aspect. And that includes both their e-commerce and their dealer sales network. And that's where all their brick and mortar sales come through their dealer network. And so, through the assessments that were performed and the analysis our client performed, they realized that prior to the crisis, a majority of their revenue came from brick and mortar, but they wanted to be prepared in case anything did happen. In this instance, it came to fruition through COVID that their e-commerce channel could potentially become a key revenue generating process. So they decided to deem that key for their planning purposes. Beyond just performing an impact analysis, if a particular process were to go offline, we're able to perform threat assessments. And those threats can be anything from earthquakes and floods and tornadoes to fire or pandemics and epidemics or loss of people in generic sense. And it was through an analysis like that they realized that their dealer sales network would be most at risk if there were any pandemic or epidemic scenarios, or if there was a loss of personnel, key personnel in the network. And so it was this threat analysis that helped them realize that this is some focus they need to put towards their business and how they need to be prepared for their e-commerce solution. And the other key threat assessment here is specifically for our Rockville, Maryland shipping facility. And they performed a site assessment and to understand what would be the impact to our pick, pack, and ship group if that same scenarios were realized. And again, those pandemic scenarios obviously very applicable to what's going on in the world. And so it's this facility-based threat paired with this next chart that happened that helped them understand their business was not well prepared. And so this Rockville, Maryland column here, and just to orient you on this chart, each one of the rows represents the RTO time for a given process, and then each one of our columns is a location. So we can see for our Rockville, Maryland location that we have 10 processes that have an RTO time of 4 hours and 3 that are 8 hours. And so that increased risk from the pandemic scenario helped them realize that both the Rockville, Maryland and the San Antonio offices had just a high concentration of critical processes, and they needed to pursue geographic diversity and redistribute these key functions across their national offices, especially when compared to some of their other offices where there's hardly any critical processes in place. They have 35 total processes for the organization that had that 4-hour RTO, and 20 of those 35 were between those two offices. So this type of analysis can really help them prepare their organization in advance of any crises. The last report I want to draw your attention to is allowing us to view vendor dependencies. The ServiceNow Business Continuity Management solution allows you to map dependencies between processes, applications, vendors or hardwares, the various groups within your organization, and we'll show you what that looks like in a moment. But with all of that data, we can start to identify when we maybe have a single point of failure due to reliance on a single vendor. And so, previously through this analysis, our client realized that this transmission supplier for their truck manufacturing process was single sourced through this ABC transmission vendor. They realized that if for some reason ABC Transmission was unable to fulfill their orders, that their entire business essentially would come to a halt without the ability to manufacture their trucks. So they sought out supplier diversity and brought on XYZ Transmission as a minority supplier, but also put in contractual provisions that should ABC Transmission be able to fulfill their orders, that XYZ would be able to ramp up and keep our manufacturing company operational. The next screen I want to walk through is looking at our truck manufacturing process. So as part of the business continuity management solution, we're able to define those child and parent dependencies for our truck manufacturers. We're able to say that our ability to pack and ship, our ability to sell through our dealer brick and mortars and our e-commerce sites is dependent on our truck manufacturing process. Similarly, our truck manufacturing process is dependent on our vendors. We see that from our ABC Transmission and our XYZ Transmission vendors here on either end. But it's also important that our assembly processes, our component ordering processes, logistics, painting, supply chain management, all remain operational for our truck manufacturing process to proceed. So one common question we get from folks is, how do you get all of this information, these processes, these applications, any vendors, hardware, the various groups within the organization? And you can leverage the power of the ServiceNow platform by using the CMDB. If your organization has previously configured that and you have that information available to you, there's native connectivity into the business continuity management solution here. So you don't have to go and create all the records for your organization to populate this. Similarly, the use of the CMDB is not a dependency for the business continuity management solution. So if you don't presently use this today, you're able to take full advantage of the solution otherwise. So it's through this type of view that it helps the organization take easy analysis and identify any single points of failure, and they can even drill down into any one of these processes. So if I wanted to maybe look at our e-commerce process, I can click right in a second. It'll refresh, and then we can see from an e-commerce perspective, what are all the different dependencies based on that. So you're able to chase the dependencies to really understand kind of a cascading failure scenario where if one part of the organization goes offline, you have the potential, obviously, to have a cascading failure. So in addition to performing those business impact analyses, mapping these dependencies to understand their operating environment, their organization at large, you have the ability to document recovery plans, BCDR plans, in terms of how you would go about recovering from a failure. And what's nice about the business continuity management solution in ServiceNow is it will leverage these dependencies that we have here, where if I say that my truck manufacturing process has gone offline, it will tell me all of the upstream and downstream dependencies so that I can understand, oh, wow, if my truck manufacturing went offline, I maybe have a issue with my pack, pick, and ship process, or maybe I'm going to be unable to fulfill my e-commerce orders. And we can select other processes to pull together all the different continuity plans that need to be executed in a recovery event management situation. And through those recovery events, we can obviously take action should we have a realized downtime or loss of process. But you can also perform exercises. And the exercise for our client was key in understanding a few things. So that they ran an exercise that if for some reason a key vendor went offline and they chose their transmission supplier, and if all of our corporate offices had to work remote, how would our business survive? And so they realized two key points in their exercise. The first is that they needed to increase their VPN capacity. They needed to make sure that if they find themselves in an all remote workplace scenario, that the business can continue. And so they took that action based on this exercise to ensure that their VPN capacity would be able to support the entire organization. And they looked for supplier diversity based on the identification that the transmission supplier was a single point of failure for the entire organization's ability to generate revenue on a day-to-day basis. So through these recovery events, we're able to identify participants, making sure that the right folks are involved, either from an exercise perspective or if this is an actualized event. And we can appoint individuals to the various different roles that we may need to run our recovery. So we maybe need an incident commander, different officers for security or liaison, and the different leads from an operation, planning, logistics, and finance side. Similarly, we can rope in the various sponsors, the contributors of this process. And this links to the user groups and the users that are already in ServiceNow. So there's no additional configuration necessary. But as part of this particular plan, we're able to see this recovery event, we're able to see all the plans and all the tasks that were undertaken. And for each one of the plans, we can specify the priority of a given task. So if one of our first tasks needs to be to notify the continuity team or the disaster recovery team, we can make sure that that's the first action that occurs. But we can also specify some lower priority tasks that should the recovery team have bandwidth, we want to take on. And so when you take all of these plans into a recovery event, it shows you the amalgamation of all the different plans sorted by your priority to make sure that you're able to take the appropriate action. I think maybe we have a question. And on the Q&A. So the question is, does the BCM dependency map automatically update the GRC workbench risk dependency maps, or is there a native relationship between the two? Travis, feel free to jump in here, but there's a ability to have a native connection between the BCM solution and the GRC stuff so that you can form your processes based on these recovery events. And so,
yeah, that's right. So that would affect your impact, as well as you can have that likelihood as well as that impact change on your risk dashboard. Correct.
Okay. So ultimately in our exercise, they took that effort to perform their lessons learned and identify those areas for improvement, which ultimately helped prevent serious impact to the organization in the current COVID-19 environment.